Imagine dedicating your life to defying the system, not out of greed, not out of cruelty, but out of a burning belief that you were owed something more. That the rules were written to cage you. That obedience was surrender. What if every bank they robbed, every law they shattered, felt less like crime, and more like revolution? They weren't just partners in crime. They were believers. In each other. In rebellion. In the intoxicating idea that freedom could be taken, not granted. Their passion didn't just ignite a romance, it ignited a spree. A streak of daring acts that made headlines, sparked debates, and turned them into whispered legends in underground circles. Some called them criminals. Others called them courageous. But what happens when the adrenaline fades? When the headlines turn from fascination to condemnation? When the very world you tried to defy becomes the audience to your downfall? They once felt unstoppable. Untouchable. Alive. But the fire that fueled their rebellion would eventually consume them, leaving behind not glory, not liberation, but a lifetime of judgment, regret, and the unbearable realization that the freedom they fought for never truly existed. Welcome to First West Stories. Stories of our fathers. If you love our frontier legends and ancestors, drop a comment, like, share it with a friend, and subscribe. Most of all, stay till the very end, the wildest part is always waiting there. Ethan Vale never planned to become a criminal. He planned to become successful. There's a difference. At 28, Ethan had done everything right. Degree. Internship. Corporate job. He believed in the system, until the system quietly showed him it did not believe in him. The promotion went to the CEO's nephew. The housing loan was denied because of a risk profile. The medical insurance loophole left his mother drowning in bills. He didn't snap. He simmered. Across the city, Mara Ivers was already done believing. Mara didn't simmer. She burned. She had grown up watching her father lose everything when a private investment firm gutted the small manufacturing plant he worked at. Restructuring, they called it. She called it theft in a suit. She had studied political science not to climb ladders, but to expose them. She wrote essays about economic oppression. Organized protests. Posted viral threads dismantling corporate greed. But anger online doesn't pay rent. And revolution doesn't fix broken pipes. They met at a community forum about housing displacement. Ethan was there out of frustration. Mara was there out of fury. She spoke that night. Not calmly. Not diplomatically. Passion dripped from her words like gasoline. They call it market correction, she said into the microphone. I call it legal theft. When corporations extract everything from working people and call it growth, what are we supposed to do? Applaud. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that felt dangerous. But because she said the quiet part out loud. After the forum, they argued. That's how it started. Not flirting. Not romance. Debate. You talk like collapse is the only answer, Ethan challenged. It is, she replied. You just don't want to admit you've already been collapsed. He should have walked away. Instead, he asked her to coffee. The first time they crossed a line, it didn't feel like a line. It felt like logic. Mara had discovered a financial loophole, a microfraud buried in a predatory lending app targeting low-income workers. Late fees stacked in ways that violated policy but were hard to prove. Technically illegal, she admitted. Morally. Ethan asked. Corrective. They didn't rob anyone. They redirected money. Small sums at first. Exploiting algorithm weaknesses. Pulling thousands from corporate excess accounts into digital wallets. It's victimless, Ethan told himself. He had spreadsheets proving the companies wouldn't even notice. The first transfer hit at 2:13 a.m. They stared at the screen. $4,870. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the feeling. Mara laughed, not wildly, not hysterically. Relieved. You feel that, she whispered. Ethan nodded. He did. Not fear. Not guilt. Power. For the first time in years, he felt like the system blinked first. The second job was bigger. This time, they targeted an executive bonus distribution loophole. Corporate overcompensation redirected through shell pathways. Ethan built the code. Mara identified the vulnerabilities. They worked side by side in her apartment, fueled by cheap wine and dangerous confidence. It wasn't just collaboration. It was intimacy. They kissed the night before execution. Not out of romance. Out of shared adrenaline. When the transfer cleared, $62,000, Mara grabbed his face and kissed him like they had conquered something. And maybe they believed they had. News broke 2 weeks later. Financial irregularities under investigation. They watched coverage from her couch. Corporate embezzlement suspected. They smiled. Not because they wanted chaos. But because for once, the corporations looked confused. They'll never trace it, Ethan said. Mara didn't answer. She was watching the screen differently. Not scared. Exhilarated. Crime changed them quietly. They started walking differently. Talking differently. Holding secrets like shared oxygen. They weren't stealing for survival anymore. They were stealing for statement. A housing development fund siphoned for executive retreats. Drained. A pharmaceutical research pool bloated beyond use. Reallocated. Each act justified in long philosophical debates that stretched past midnight. We're redistributing imbalance. We're forcing accountability. We're correcting injustice. They believed it. Or at least, they needed to. Their relationship deepened through danger. They slept tangled in cables and blueprints. They mapped out targets like activists mapping protests. And online. Whispers began. Anonymous posts praising a mysterious financial vigilante disrupting corporate greed. Someone coined a name. The Liberation Pair. They laughed when they saw it. We're not heroes, Ethan said. Mara tilted her head. Maybe we are. That was the first crack. Fame, even anonymous fame, is intoxicating. Messages flooded encrypted forums. Thank you for exposing them. Keep going. You're giving people hope. Hope. That word tasted sweet. They weren't criminals. They were symbols. The money piled up, but they didn't splurge. That would have felt wrong. Instead, they funded small community grants anonymously. Paid off medical bills through shell charities. It reinforced the illusion. We're good. We're justified. We're necessary. But the system doesn't ignore embarrassment forever. Investigations intensified. Cybercrime divisions stepped in. Banking security upgraded. The game became harder. Which made it more thrilling. You ever think about stopping? Ethan asked one night. Mara looked at him like he'd insulted her. Stop. Now. When we're finally pushing back. He didn't argue. But doubt flickered. Because somewhere beneath the ideology, he liked the rush too much. And he knew it. The night everything shifted, they targeted something bigger. Not a corporation. A political donor network laundering money through real estate shells. It was ambitious. Risky. Too risky, Ethan warned. Too important, Mara countered. The transfer amount would be massive. 7 figures. This wasn't corrective anymore. This was declaration. As they initiated the breach, alarms triggered faster than expected. Firewalls weren't standard. They were waiting. Ethan's hands froze over the keyboard. Mara. I see it. Their IP was masked. But the system was fighting back in real time. This wasn't a sleeping corporation. This was federal-level defense. For the first time since the first $4,870, Ethan felt something cold crawl up his spine. Fear. We abort, he said firmly. Mara hesitated. Just 1 second. But that second would matter later. They pulled out. But not cleanly. A trace fragment remained. Tiny. But enough. The news cycle shifted from curiosity to urgency. Major cyber threat under federal review. Authorities seek coordinated digital criminal network. Criminal. The word hit differently now. Public tone changed too. Online supporters debated morality. Some still praised. Others questioned. Is this really helping anyone? Who gets hurt indirectly? A small nonprofit mistakenly flagged in one of their financial disruptions collapsed under scrutiny. 3 employees lost jobs. Ethan saw the article first. He didn't show Mara immediately. When he did, she went quiet. That wasn't supposed to happen. No, he said softly. It wasn't. For the first time, their rebellion had collateral damage. Not corporations. People. Real ones. And something shifted between them. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like a hairline crack in glass. Still holding. But weakened. They lay in bed that night without touching. The silence felt heavier than any siren. Do you regret it? Ethan asked into the dark. Mara stared at the ceiling. No, she said. But her voice lacked fire. He turned toward her. I don't regret us, she added quickly. That wasn't what he meant. But he didn't push. Outside, somewhere in the city, investigators were assembling timelines. Tracing patterns. Building profiles. The liberation pair were no longer myth. They were targets. And neither Ethan nor Mara fully understood yet. That the freedom they thought they were stealing was slowly stealing them instead. The city lights no longer felt like celebration. They were searchlights. Every reflection off glass towers reminded me of the shadows creeping closer. We had started believing our own myth, the liberation pair, as if notoriety was a shield. But the first time an investigator asked questions in person, that shield felt paper-thin. Ethan sat in the dim light of Mara's apartment, the glow from his laptop illuminating his face. Lines of code, financial flows, hacked accounts, everything meticulously catalogued. He had always been precise. Strategic. But tonight, strategy felt like a fragile dream. Do you think they know it's us? Mara's voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it. They're tracing patterns, Ethan said. Our previous clean runs, they're looking at them differently now. They know the person who orchestrated the first few redistributions wouldn't stop at small scale. Mara exhaled slowly, pacing near the window. The city stretched below her like a map of consequences. I told you, we're in over our heads. He didn't answer. Instead, he traced his fingers along the spreadsheets, checking anomalies, confirming patterns, calculating exposure. Every line of code, every transaction they had made, could be a thread to unravel them. And yet, the thrill, the rush, lingered. He hated that it lingered. The first public misstep was subtle. A local newspaper reported a suspicious transfer from a hospital foundation account, the kind Mara and Ethan had intended to redirect. It wasn't much money, barely $5,000, but enough to catch someone's attention. Ethan had thought, victimless. Mara had thought, corrective. The employees affected weren't in the headlines, but the board members were furious. Investigators were called. Financial audits initiated. I hate that we're becoming headlines, Mara muttered, staring at the article. Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered the exhilaration of their first transfer, the tiny adrenaline spike that had become a compulsion. Now, adrenaline felt like poison. Every success was a potential trap. He glanced at Mara. She was beautiful in the half-dark, hair falling over her face, eyes distant. And he realized, with a pang he didn't want to admit, that the thrill of the crimes had started to eclipse her. Not intentionally. But he could feel it. That night, they argued. Not like the first debates that sparked their connection. This was different. Raw, defensive. Maybe we've done too much, Ethan said finally, voice low. We're not correcting injustice anymore. We're just taking what we can. Mara's eyes flared. We can't stop. Not when the system has taken everything from people like us. Not when they think they can control who gets ahead. We are the correction. He swallowed hard. There it was, the ideology they had built to justify themselves. But the first cracks of doubt were forming. I don't want to be legends in a courtroom, he whispered. You won't be, she said. But her certainty was fragile. The next heist, or what they still called a redistribution, became a turning point. They targeted a wealthy political donor funneling millions through shell companies. It was complex. Risky. The largest operation they had attempted. They planned every detail. Meetings stretched into 3 a.m. brainstorming sessions. Routes mapped, server vulnerabilities studied, digital fingerprints obscured. Ethan built contingencies for contingencies. Mara monitored potential leaks, communications, every minor threat. But in the quiet hours before execution, Mara admitted she was scared. "I've never felt this level of exposure before," she whispered. "If we get caught, it won't just be fines. It won't just be embarrassment. People will know our names. Our faces." Ethan took her hand. "We'll be careful." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The operation began at dawn. They moved in tandem, not like criminals in a movie, but meticulous strategists executing a plan that had taken weeks to refine. Servers accessed. Transfers authorized. Shell accounts manipulated. It should have been perfect. Except the system fought back. The transfer triggered a silent anomaly alert. A firewall they hadn't predicted triggered, locking certain accounts and alerting the authorities. The system wasn't asleep. It was waiting. Watching. Calculating. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the gravity. "Abort," he shouted. Mara hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. A fraction that would be remembered. They managed to disconnect before the transfer completed. But a trace remained. Something small. Something that could grow into evidence. And that was the moment freedom became a cage. In the following days, they noticed the shift. Investigators were no longer shadows in the background. They were persistent. Emails flagged. Small discrepancies noted. Surveillance increased. Public fascination turned into scrutiny. Online, some still cheered them, calling them digital Robin Hoods. Others condemned them. The narrative was no longer controlled. They had become a story with multiple authors, and some wanted their heads. At home, tension between Ethan and Mara deepened. Passion remained, but fear and paranoia were now intertwined with desire. Every glance carried suspicion. Every silence carried accusation. Even intimacy became a battlefield. They slept in the same bed, but the trust that had fueled the fire of their rebellion was eroding. The moral cost revealed itself gradually. Collateral damage from their redistributions became impossible to ignore. An employee at a small nonprofit lost their job after an automated redirect they hadn't foreseen. A small family business went under due to a transfer that cleared incorrectly. Ethan stared at the news article with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. "We're not heroes," he said. "No," Mara admitted. "We're reckless." For the first time, the ideology they had built, the justification of freedom through rebellion, felt hollow. And then jealousy entered. It was subtle at first. Mara noticed Ethan's lingering attention to the online forums where admirers debated the moral implications of their work. "Are you listening to what people say about us instead of me?" she asked. Ethan, defensive, denied it. But the doubt had planted itself. Meanwhile, Mara herself began to feel the weight of public fascination. Every whispered conversation about their exploits, every sympathetic comment online, reminded her that the world was watching. And someone was watching closer than the internet: investigators, opportunists, even journalists seeking an exclusive. Paranoia became second nature. Trust frayed. The first real confrontation came unexpectedly. A private investigator had been following Mara for weeks, documenting her movements, photographing her routines. She didn't notice at first, not until Ethan spotted him from across the street. The sight ignited a new kind of fear. Not fear of capture, fear for each other. Ethan grabbed Mara's hand. "We can't let this get personal." But the intimacy that had carried them through every late-night operation now carried the weight of accountability. They had no room for error. One mistake could mean separation, imprisonment, or worse. And yet, amidst the chaos, the passion remained. Fire now fused with caution. Lust intertwined with paranoia. Love blurred into obsession. The city seemed smaller now. Not because it had changed, but because our world had shrunk. Every movement, every choice, every breath carried risk. Ethan could feel it in his bones, that subtle, persistent pressure of eyes, judgments, and consequences pressing in. "Are we being watched right now?" Mara asked, her voice tight. She moved cautiously through the apartment, checking the blinds, scanning reflections, touching nothing out of place. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the room, the familiar angles, the glow of the laptop, the lines of code still open on the screen. He hated the way fear had taken root so quickly, yet he knew they were no longer the hunters, they were the hunted. I think so, he admitted finally. And it's not just the private investigator. I feel like every transaction, every click, every tiny misstep could be under a magnifying glass. Mara nodded silently. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, it was suffocating. Their passion still lingered, a memory of better nights, better plans, better days when the thrill hadn't yet turned into dread. They had always rationalized their crimes. Each redistribution of wealth, each digital maneuver, each loophole exploited was framed as justice, a correction of imbalance. They told themselves it was necessary. They told each other. And for a while, the narrative held. But the cracks were widening. The first real blow came when one of the smaller shell transfers accidentally froze a legitimate account, a single mother's business payroll. Salaries didn't go through. Rent checks bounced. Panic emails flooded the inboxes of employees who had no idea why. Mara read the emails and went pale. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered. Ethan's hands shook slightly over the keyboard. It's collateral. We always knew there would be minor fallout. But yes, this is bigger than minor. They argued for hours that night. Not over love. Not over strategy. Over morality. Over what they had become. You started out saying this was about correction, Mara said, voice tight. Now it's, what? How many lives do we disrupt before it counts as a crime? He didn't answer. The spreadsheet in front of him, showing months of their transfers, mapped more than money. It mapped mistakes, consequences, and the tiny traces they had left behind, fingerprints digital and moral alike. The public attention escalated. Online forums debated whether the liberation pair were heroes or criminals. Journalists speculated. A few local blogs hinted at the federal investigation quietly underway. Social media attention was a double-edged sword, praise mixed with threats. The more they read, the more the line between adulation and danger blurred. Ethan found himself analyzing not just transactions, but sentiment. Fear, he realized, wasn't just about capture. It was about exposure, judgment, and vulnerability. Mara had always been fearless, but he could see it in her eyes, the first signs of cracks. Their love, which had been forged in adrenaline, now strained under pressure. They clung to each other, but trust had to compete with paranoia. Every look, every word, every touch carried weight. Then came the betrayal, the first true fracture in their partnership. Mara discovered a message on Ethan's encrypted phone. From a mysterious source, it wasn't signed, but the words were clear, you're close to a trace. Someone knows more than you think. Her hand trembled as she showed it to him. I didn't see this, Ethan said. But his eyes betrayed doubt. It could be nothing. A bot, a test, someone playing games. Mara's gaze hardened. Or it could be someone who knows us well enough to manipulate us. Who might be closer than we thought. That night, tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Love hadn't left them, but suspicion had moved in and set up residence. Every kiss, every embrace, carried an unspoken question, do you still trust me? As the weeks passed, the pressure intensified. Investigators traced minor anomalies. They weren't close to capture, but they were closing in. The FBI, cybersecurity task forces, and private contractors worked in parallel, each unaware of the other's investigation at first. Then overlapping reports created patterns. Ethan and Mara noticed anomalies in their digital defenses, timestamps that didn't align, server pings in locations they didn't recognize. Someone was probing. Testing. Waiting. Do we continue? Mara asked, late one night as they reviewed potential targets for their next redistribution. Ethan hesitated. We have to, he said finally. Stopping now would mean we never make a statement. They'd just assume we gave up. Mara shook her head. Or we're making a statement about our own arrogance. We're playing a game bigger than us. The argument wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet reckoning. One that neither wanted to face fully. Meanwhile, personal stakes began to creep in. Jealousy, subtle but sharp, entered the relationship. Ethan noticed Mara lingering on her phone, reading encrypted messages from admirers, people fascinated by their exploits. Mara noticed Ethan reading the same forums, checking posts, and speculation. Both feared the other would be seduced, not by another person, but by the mythology of themselves. Trust strained under the weight of notoriety. Love had been a unifying force in the first heists, but now it existed alongside fear, doubt, and obsession. The very passion that had made them formidable was beginning to unravel them. The turning point came in the early hours of a cold winter morning. Ethan and Mara attempted a complex redistribution, funds tied to a conglomerate known for lobbying politicians. The digital map was perfect, the code flawless. But the unexpected happened. An internal security system triggered an automated lock. Notifications went out in real time to law enforcement. Mara froze. Abort. Ethan's fingers hovered over the kill switch. He wanted to stop. But the stakes, the symbolism, the adrenaline, it was intoxicating. We can still finish it, he said. Mara shook her head violently. No. If we go through with this, we're leaving a trail we can't escape. We're going to be caught, or worse, exposed. The tension between them was palpable. Their hands brushed briefly over the keyboard, a touch that should have been comforting, but it sparked irritation instead. The intimacy of rebellion had become a battlefield. They aborted. But the trace remained. The trace was subtle, almost unnoticeable. But it was enough. Enough for investigators to start piecing together a timeline. Enough to start suspecting the pair of digital vigilantes were more than myth. And the city, once a backdrop to their passion and strategy, now felt like a cage. The first real confrontation with authority occurred 2 weeks later. A local law enforcement agent approached Mara outside her apartment. Polite. Civil, investigative. But unmistakably probing. Questions about finances. Locations. Associations. Mara deflected, answered vaguely, but Ethan watched from the window. His jaw clenched. They had always believed their digital footprint was invisible. They had been careful. But the reality was different. They weren't invisible anymore. The winter winds cut through the city like knives. They hadn't stopped at our apartment windows, our careful security measures, or the firewalls Ethan built. The chill wasn't just physical, it was everywhere. In our glances, in the silence between words, in the way we breathed together, every movement carried a weight we could no longer ignore. Ethan sat hunched over the laptop, running simulations for a redistribution they had no intention of executing yet. It was a precaution, a habit born of paranoia. He calculated timelines, server traces, potential backdoors, and fail-safes. Every variable he considered, he already knew, could fail. Mara observed him quietly. She had always admired his precision, his intellect. But now, admiration mingled with unease. The thrill that had first bound them together was morphing into fear, not of the authorities, not yet, but of themselves. Do you ever think, Mara said softly, that we've gone too far? Ethan didn't respond. Words felt useless. Any acknowledgement would be an admission, and they both knew they weren't ready to admit it. The first confrontation came one evening when Ethan noticed a shadow across the street. Not a random pedestrian. Not a car. Someone was following Mara. Someone precise, careful. He ran to intercept, his heart pounding like a drum of warning. "You're being followed," he said, almost a whisper, as he approached her from behind. Mara turned, eyes narrowing. "I know," she admitted. "I've been seeing it for days." The realization hit both of them, their anonymity was gone. The liberation pair was no longer myth, it was a target. And with exposure came temptation, the temptation to push harder, to escalate their next redistribution, to make a statement so bold it would cement their legend, to prove that they were untouchable. But Ethan hesitated. Love and trust began to fray. It started with small things. Mara would read encrypted messages and not share them immediately. Ethan would analyze public forums obsessively, obsessive patterns creeping into his thoughts. They began questioning each other, not maliciously, but instinctively. Suspicion became second nature. "You're too quiet," Mara said one night. "You're thinking about something you're not telling me." Ethan sighed. "I'm thinking about every possible failure, every trace, every mistake we've made." Her eyes softened but held sharpness. "You know we can't stop now. You know that." "I know," he admitted. "But knowing doesn't mean it's not terrifying." The next redistribution was their boldest yet. A massive corporate hedge fund, funds earmarked for political influence, would be redirected into local nonprofit projects. They justified it as necessary, corrective, moral. The risk was astronomical. The trace could be catastrophic. Planning stretched over nights without sleep. Every server trace, every code path, every firewall was accounted for, or so they thought. The operation became an all-consuming obsession. They lived in the plan. They breathed the plan. And yet, something was off. Ethan noticed subtle signs in the code logs, anomalies he hadn't left, timestamps out of sync, IP addresses that didn't belong. Someone was probing. Testing. Waiting. He didn't tell Mara immediately. There was no point. Tension was already high. Paranoia had crept into their relationship, and the fear of admitting vulnerability could shatter what remained. The night of execution, the city was unusually quiet. Street lights flickered. A distant siren wailed. Ethan and Mara moved with synchronized precision, executing their plan flawlessly, or so they believed. Halfway through, alarms erupted. Not from the corporate system, not from servers, but from the street. Lights flashing. Vehicles arriving. Footsteps pounding. Ethan froze. Mara's hand gripped his arm. Abort. But the sequence had already triggered notifications. They had been traced. Not digitally, physically. Someone knew their identities, their locations. The adrenaline that once thrilled them now became paralyzing. The romanticized rebellion had transformed into panic. They sprinted across rooftops, ducking into alleyways, heartbeats sinking with danger. They split to avoid capture. Ethan ducked into a service corridor, Mara slipping into a side street. For the first time, separation felt like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was survival. From across the city, Mara watched Ethan vanish into shadows. A surge of fear, longing, and anger collided inside her. She knew the game had changed. There was no turning back. Hours later, they reunited in a prearranged safe house. Exhausted, trembling, they faced each other without speaking. The silence said everything. They had survived. But the illusion of control, of freedom, of invincibility, was gone. Collateral damage became unavoidable. Employees affected by the aborted redistribution were scrutinized. Some were fired. Others faced legal inquiries. Innocent parties, people who had nothing to do with corporate greed, suffered because of their choices. Ethan stared at the list. Numbers, names, emails. Real people. Real consequences. I didn't think it would hurt anyone, Mara admitted quietly. I thought it was justice. I thought it was right. Ethan shook his head. We were never right. We were just reckless. The fire that had bound them together, passion intertwined with ideology, now cast shadows that chilled the soul. The relationship fractured further. Arguments erupted over strategy, morality, and priorities. What had been thrill now became conflict. What had been intimacy became scrutiny. Every plan was questioned. Every decision dissected. Jealousy mingled with fear. The myth of the liberation pair, which once empowered them, now loomed as a specter, threatening to consume love, trust, and sanity. And still, despite it all, they couldn't stop. The city had become both arena and prison. Every step was dangerous. Every breath calculated. Every choice weighed against the possibility of exposure, capture, or worse, betrayal. The city was quieter than usual that morning, though the tension was palpable. Every street corner, every flicker of movement, felt like an accusation. We had been careful, too careful, perhaps, and yet the consequences of our choices had finally caught up with us. Ethan and I sat on opposite sides of our small safe house, the faint hum of the city below a cruel reminder that we were still out there, but not free. We had evaded capture so far, but the chase had shifted. It wasn't just authorities anymore, it was the weight of every life we had touched, every error we had made, every moral compromise we had ignored in the thrill of our rebellion. I traced my fingers over the ledger that documented our redistributions, names, accounts, amounts. People we had thought we were helping. People we had inadvertently harmed. I couldn't tell anymore if we were criminals or saviors, if our actions were righteous or reckless. And Ethan, he looked the same, haunted, exhausted, staring at the screen, the ghost of our myth reflected in his eyes. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. A knock on the door, precise, deliberate. Not loud, not threatening, professional. Ethan and I froze. The calculated tension that had been with us for weeks crystallized in that single moment. He glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. Do we open it? I shook my head. We wait. But waiting wasn't an option. The knock came again, firmer this time. Ethan stepped to the door, hand on the handle, mind racing through every contingency. As he opened it, we were met by a team of investigators, not the rough city cops we had imagined, but specialists, precise, organized, knowing exactly what to do. There was no chase, no dramatic gunfight, no opportunity for escape. Just inevitability. We were escorted quietly. No fanfare. No heroism. Just the crushing reality of our choices. As we were led through the streets, people stared. Some whispered admiration, others disgust. It was surreal, the myth of the liberation pair reduced to hushed murmurs and pointing fingers. I realized then that notoriety wasn't freedom. It was a cage built by our own hands. In the interrogation room, the truth of our actions hit with a visceral weight. Ethan and I were questioned not just about accounts and transactions, but about motives, about morality, about intent. Every justification we had built, every narrative that had kept us sane and united, was stripped away, exposed as rationalization for recklessness. I could see it in the faces of those across the table, judgment, disappointment, disbelief. And in that moment, I understood fully that freedom was never ours. Not really. Not when every action has consequences that ripple beyond our control. The moral reckoning was the heaviest burden. Ethan and I were allowed to speak, but every word was weighed, dissected. The collateral damage we had caused was catalogued in meticulous detail. Families disrupted, businesses affected, livelihoods altered. Our rebellion, which had begun as an idealistic pursuit of justice, had left scars deeper than we had anticipated. You thought you were correcting imbalance, one investigator said, voice even. But justice isn't delivered by chaos. It's measured, accountable, human. Your passion blinded you to the consequences. And now you will face them. We sat in silence afterward, reflecting. Not as criminals, not as heroes, but as people confronted with the magnitude of our own hubris. I looked at Ethan. We wanted freedom, I whispered. We wanted justice. And yet, look at what we've become. He nodded slowly, expression unreadable. We became the story. And the story has a cost. It was the hardest lesson I had ever learned, that liberty sought without foresight, without empathy, without restraint, could never exist without consequence. The trial was public, a spectacle we had anticipated but never imagined in its full scope. Journalists swarmed, citizens debated, the myth we had built clashed violently with the reality of human judgment. Every decision, every misstep, every moral compromise was analyzed and critiqued. Ethan and I faced the consequences together, bound not just by crime, but by the haunting understanding of how close passion and recklessness can lead to ruin. In the final moments, I realized the cruelest irony. We had sought liberation from systems we despised. We had believed that our rebellion was righteous, that our courage could alter the balance of justice. And yet, in the end, it wasn't the law that judged us harshest, it was the truth of our own actions. Every ledger, every trace, every choice was a mirror reflecting not power, not freedom, but the fragility of human morality. And in that reflection, I saw fear, love, passion, and regret intertwined so tightly that it was impossible to separate one from the other. Ethan and I left the courthouse together, not free, not unscathed, but with a haunting clarity. The world we had tried to correct remained flawed, unyielding, indifferent. Our love, tested by fear and ambition, had survived, but it had been irrevocably altered. We understood finally that crime could never be liberation. That passion, unchecked by conscience, could leave scars deeper than imprisonment. And that, sometimes, the price of courage is not heroism, but the cold judgment of history. In the quiet afterward, we sat on a bench overlooking the city. Winter light cut across the streets, illuminating not freedom, but consequence. I thought we could change the world, I said softly. Ethan took my hand. We changed something, he replied. Just not what we expected. And with that, the story closed, not with triumph, but with understanding. Not with myth, but with truth. The liberation we sought was never outward, it had always been within us. The reckoning had arrived. And we would live, forever aware, with the weight of everything we had become.